Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Oh, let's see, I can hear you. Let's make sure. Yeah, let me make sure I get you on the Spanish while we let people jump on. So, welcome. There we go. You should be English to Spanish, so it should work. Okay, try now. Welcome, everybody. There we go. We had a little bit of an issue, but we've got it fixed with the interpretation. So thanks for joining us tonight. While we're waiting, if you get a chance, just in the chat, can you let us know how old your loved one is, or how old is the age group you work with? I know we had over 100 people register for this presentation. We will be recording it, but we want to make sure we kind of tailor the presentation to the people who are here. And I'm going to go ahead and turn on our transcriptionist. Welcome. I don't know, Kelly, can you see some of the chat coming up?
Yes.
Oh, perfect. All right. Welcome. So it looks like we have a lot of the little ones. Oh, and thank you. Love hearing that. So we have all ages. I saw lots of little ones, and I saw lots of, I don't want to say old because I'm not old either. We'll say more experienced individuals. So it'll be great. All right. I know we're going to have people continue to hop on, but I want to be respectful of everybody's time. Hi, everybody. My name is Beth Berg. I'm the Executive Director for the Autism Society Inland Empire, and I'm so happy to have Kelly Lundenberg, who I am very privileged to call a friend, as well as a colleague. Kelly is a what we call CODA, occupational therapy assistant, and one of her passions is autism and sensory. And of course, I'm completely unbiased. I think she's brilliant. So I'm always really happy when she joins us to share her experience and her knowledge. Kelly is also on the spectrum. I'll let her talk a little bit about her experiences as she does that. So I think everybody is in for a huge treat tonight. We will be taking questions at the end, but go ahead and put them in the chat as you think of them, and we'll go back and review them. We do have the Spanish interpreter, and I turned on the live transcription as well. So we're trying to make this as accessible to everybody as possible. I think that's it. Did I miss anything? We are recording, so it'll go out tomorrow, and it'll be up on our website tomorrow as well. I think those are all the usual questions we get. Did I forget anything, Ms. Kelly?
I think that's about it. So.
Okay, well, that's great. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and shut my video off and go mute and let Kelly take it away. So welcome, everybody.
Let's see. Let me go ahead and share my PowerPoint with you guys. Share. All right. Can you guys see it?
Yes, I'm on mute, so you wouldn't know, but yes.
All right. So welcome, everybody. Like Beth said, I'm an occupational therapy assistant and work primarily with students on the spectrum. And I'm also an adult with autism. So for me personally, sensory was my biggest challenge growing up, and I feel like helping others understand some of the sensory aspects and experiences individuals on the spectrum may experience is really vital in helping with understanding. So let's just go over some of the basic definitions. So stimming is the kind of the slang term that we typically throw around. But stimming stands for self-stimulatory behavior, or in the medical community, they often say stereotypy. The Merriam-Webster dictionary defines it as frequent repetition of the same, typically purposeless movement, gesture, posture, vocal sound, and utterances. But I really want you to think about the word purpose as, or purposeless, as we go through this presentation. The definition of purposeless is actually just referring to that somebody's not reaching out their hand to pick up an object, or they're not walking over to gain access to, a material. So purposeless is defined as like a functional task more than the actual need that you'll see as we go through the presentation. Because for individuals with autism, and all people really, stimming is purposeful, as you'll see. So while we all experience neurotypical and neurodivergent individuals, all people experience stimming, but it's often more pronounced in autistic individuals and those with other developmental differences. So remember, it's a repetitive, non-functional movement. So think about the things that you do in your daily life. There's hair twirling, thumb sucking, foot shaking. You're not actually, being productive with those movements, but it serves your neurological system with, some sort of input. So, other common ones are nail biting and finger tapping and pacing. And as you can see, like, most of you can point out at least one of these activities that you do in your daily lives, or have loved ones that do. And that it just to go and show you that, yes, we all stim. Some of the more common stereotypical behaviors that are described in autism, but are also common to all individuals, maybe rocking, jumping, flapping, clapping your hands repetitively, head banging, flicking your fingers, watching objects fall. So you may have, a child that just keeps picking up sand and dropping it in front of their eyes repetitively, or picking up objects and smelling them repetitively, or vocalizing noises or humming. So I'm going to show you this video. If you haven't had the opportunity to see, this is a young boy with autism who's playing on the playground and demonstrates hand flopping. Sorry, I didn't let the video run, but as you could see, this little boy was flapping his hands while he's running and engaging in play on the playground. Now, hand flapping, rocking, clapping are actually part of the diagnostic criteria for being on the spectrum. And it's often pathologized by many professionals, which means they're really kind of defining it as an abnormal or unusual behavior. But when we actually look at it, we see that these more obvious signs of self-stimulatory behavior are seen in all neurotypical people. if you look at a baby or a toddler that is considered to be neurotypical, many of them rock, many of them bang their head, many of them flap their hands. It's really kind of the sensory motor stage of development. They're figuring out what calms them. They're figuring out how their bodies operate. They're gaining body awareness. And we'll go over some of these terms in a little bit. But it's really, very common to see a little baby, on their floor playing, rocking back and forth, or seeing a toddler flap their hands when they become upset. These are very typical behaviors in human development. So what we know is, as children begin to grow, as they learn about their bodies, as they learn about their nervous system, they develop new strategies for meeting their sensory needs, for regulating their bodies. And we're going to go into what that means in a little bit. But it's really a trial and error as the child develops. So, and what we can observe still is that those basic functional needs for stimming are still observed in adults under extreme emotion, even if it's a typical adult. And so we'll watch a video of that. So as you watch this video, just keep in mind, how many times is this individual jumping? How many times is this individual flapping? And why is it or isn't it considered, normal in this situation?
They say three's a crowd, but when you're winning, who cares? For the first time ever, 3 contestants on The Price is Right each spun the wheel to total $1.
65 for $1. 65 for $1. You just spent $1.
If you think she's excited, just wait for the next guy.
I thought you'd be a little happier than that, to tell you the truth. Kind of disappointed. Stanford, come on over here, buddy.
He spins the wheel and
50 for $1. 50 for $1.
with 2 in the winner's circle, what's one more?
Let's have a 3-way tie on the dollar. This just might happen. 70, tie, 3-way tie, 3-way tie, 3-way tie, 3-way tie. Yes! Yes! If it gets there, 95.
Sadly,
Oh, not quite.
only one player got to move on to the showcase round, but each walked away with $1,000. With luck like this, these 3 should definitely play the lottery together. For InsideEdition.com, I'm Kelly.
All right. So as we could see in that video, it's really it's really very common in extreme circumstances to have those behaviors. It's not considered abnormal for anybody in that audience to see them, jumping and flapping, because the audience identifies that that person is experiencing high levels of emotion and is just expressing their joy. So let's look at why we actually stim. So primarily we stim or have self-stimulatory behaviors to regulate ourselves, for self-regulation, so that basically our brain is seeking homeostasis, which is kind of a balance at all times. And this is all people. So when you first wake up let's look at the graph for a second. So you have on your x-axis, you have low arousal and high arousal. So your low arousal is your very kind of tired, slow moving, kind of unaware of the environment. And a good example of this is like when you first wake up in the morning and you're just kind of sitting at the edge of your bed. You're very lethargic. You just can't get up and move. you just feel like, oh, I can't go to work today. I don't even want to get in the shower. All right. And overall at the far end is your high arousal. And that's where you have a high anxiety. You can see that, the person's anxious, their eyes are darting around the room. They can't quite sit still. They can't really attend or focus on what they're doing. So you can see that those are the two extremes of arousal. And then you can see on the y-axis the performance quality, which is at the top of the bell curve is the optimal level of arousal, which is when you are able to really focus and attend and do your best work at that given point of time. So it's when you're, able to get 15 chores done or sit down at your desk at work and, knock out an entire list of activity. So you just feel like you're very productive, very focused, very on target. And so you have to be in this optimal kind of middle state of arousal to, you can't be, very low arousal or very tired, and you can't be too anxious and, in kind of a fight or flight response. You just have to kind of be in between those two levels to be at this optimal performance ability. So your brain is always seeking this homeostasis, this balance, to get to this just right level of arousal, because our brain wants to be able to function at an optimal level. So common reasons that we have difficulty with self-regulation and may need to stim are because of emotional regulation issues. It could be you're overstimulated, which we'll talk about, understimulated, or have pain. Okay, and we're going to go over those slides. So emotions, that's kind of very basic. I won't spend a lot of time on that. Just like, if you win the lottery or if you want a new car, you're going to be jumping up and down and flapping. If you're waiting for your, child to be born in the delivery room, and you're not sure when it's going to arrive, you may be pacing the floor back and forth. You may, if you're waiting for a job interview, be biting on your cuticles. So these repetitive behaviors help us cope with our emotions in these certain circumstances of high emotion. So overstimulation. Overstimulation is when you have too much sensory input. So things might be too bright, too loud, smelly, or this busy slide, for example. There's just too much information here. It causes a general anxiety for most people. And, when we are in anxious situations like a Black Friday crowd, we may seek out self-stimulatory behaviors like rubbing our fingers together or rocking while we stand in line. And these are just to calm our nervous system so that they can tolerate this incoming sensory bombardment that is seen. And what we do know is that familiar repetitive movements like rocking back and forth, or activities like completing the sand drop that I was talking about, where they're dropping sand into a tube and watching it repetitively, are very calming to the nervous system. It's very predictable to our brains. So it helps provide a soothing moment for our brains in a chaotic environment. So understimulation, that's where we don't quite have enough sensory input. This is where, you may be bored of your environment. There's nothing to draw your attention. You can't even focus because there is nothing to focus on. You may have been sitting too long and need to move, or may not have enough noise to, have you attend to a task at that moment. Your brain just has a hard time focusing because there's a lack of stimulation. And if you look at different studies, well, you can see that the nervous system and brain require stimulation to perform at that optimal level of arousal. So, there was one study done looking at orphanages, and if a child was in, I believe it was a Romanian orphanage, where the child had been the children had been in a crib for most of their life. And even though they weren't necessarily born with sensory issues, the lack of stimulation caused the children to seek stimulation in other ways, such as rocking and head banging, to gain some of that sensory input to provide stimulation to the brain. And we see that similar behavior in children who are blind. You often see children with visual impairment rocking back and forth. They may be, shaking their hand to gain more body awareness. They do other like self-stimulatory behaviors to help compensate for their lack of sight at that moment. And then just even in simple everyday terms, if you're sitting, at a conference for too long and you are unable to focus, most of us will fidget with, a pen, or, tap our fingers, or twirl our hair, or other self-stimulatory behaviors in order to gain stimulation so that we're able to still attend and focus on the meeting. So why we stim is pain is another one. Studies have found that pain may release beta endorphins, which is a chemical in order to reduce pain or increase pleasure in the brain when you're injured. So it's commonly used for self-injury we commonly use self-injury to distract from pain. So imagine you're walking to your bathroom in the middle of the night and, you catch your little toe on the wall and, you stub it. Many of us will do something that's considered a self-injurious behavior, such as biting our finger or hitting our thigh, in order to help distract ourselves from the pain that we were just experiencing. So now that we know that, stimming and even some of the more prominent behaviors are actually pretty typical in the human condition, we're going to look at the fact of why is there an increase in stimming in autism. So I know for me, I was frequently stimming growing up. I would constantly rock back and forth. I would pace frequently. I'd flap my hands when I was excited. I'd frequently fiddle with things, and I'd bang my head when I was upset. And all of these behaviors were in some way functional to my brain. As I've grown older, I, especially for some of the more prolific behaviors, I've learned to use other, coping strategies and self-regulation strategies in order to avoid, banging my head or hurting myself in some form or manner. So in autism, we could see that these stimming behaviors are common. But let's look at our senses. We have our sense of vision. Most of us know what that is. Our sense of smell, hearing, touch, taste. Those are all very common knowledge to the everyday person. We also have our vestibular system, or our sense of balance. It's located in our inner ear, and it basically tells us where our body is in relation to gravity. So if we're bending over to pick up something, our inner ear is telling us that we're bending over. If we dive into a pool and our eyes are shut, we still know which way is up because our vestibular system is telling us which way is up, basically. We have our proprioceptive system, our sense of body awareness. This is located in these are located in our muscles and joints. And it basically tells us what our body is doing at any given time. And then our interoceptive state is our state of internal organs. So it tells us, you know, if our heart is racing. It tells us if our stomach is growling. It tells us when we need to use the restroom. It tells us how fast our heart rate or our respiration rate. So it lets us know all of the internal states of being. And in autism, as we'll see at the next slide, just like everybody has these senses, in autism, we often experience some sort of sensory processing issue. So it's very common for one or many of our senses to have some sort of difference, I would say, from the neurotypical individual. So if you have a modulation disorder, this is very, very common in most individuals on the spectrum. You could be over responsive in one or many senses, which means you imagine modulation at the entire category of modulation as the volume on a radio. If you turn the volume up a little bit too loud, you can, it's just very abrasive. So for me, I'm very over responsive. It's very loud for me when I'm in situations for many of my senses. For example, my hearing is very sensitive. I can hear, light waves, or I can hear electricity going through the wires in the walls. My vision is very over responsive. I can see the light waves coming from fluorescent lights, and I can see, dust particles floating around in the air, and I can see many little pieces of everything happening in my environment. So it becomes very visually distracting to me. So it's over responsivity means you're just experiencing too much. Under responsivity is you're not experiencing enough. Just like when we were talking about the low arousal, it's kind of a low arousal of a specific sense. So when you're under responsive, things might seem a little bit too quiet, like your volume is turned down a little bit too low. Like you don't quite get all the details of everything because you don't quite hear it loud enough. And then you have your sensory craving. And this modulation issue causes a lot of dysregulation in autism. And so because for me, for example, remember I was talking about that I can hear the electricity going through the wires and the walls. I hear the refrigerator humming all the time. I hear, people's heart beating if they're very close. I can hear many things and my brain doesn't filter it out. So because of that, just like you guys may rock back and forth in the store on Black Friday, for me, just going to work where it's a simple classroom may feel as overwhelming to me as Black Friday does to a neurotypical individual. So you'll see that I may display some of these stimming behaviors in a calmer environment, but because the neurotypical individual doesn't experience the world as intensely as I do, they may think it's odd if I jump or flap or squeal in any given moment because their sensory systems are not processing the same things that I am in that given moment. These are also common sensory-based motor disorder and discrimination disorder. And they do have some relevance in self-stimulatory behaviors, but we really won't go over that too much today. I want to leave plenty of time for questions for you guys. But basically, your sensory-based motor disorders, you have your dyspraxia, which is praxis is basically what allows us to move. So it's creating an idea like in your mind, like before you actually move, you're like, okay, I want to go to the store. So that's your idea. You created the idea in your mind. And then after you have the idea, you create a plan. So this is where you hear the term motor planning a lot. Like, okay, to get to the store, I need to grab my keys, put my shoes on, walk to the car, get in the car and go to the store. So your brain plans out how you're going to get to the store. And once you're actually in movement, you're executing the movement. And you'll see a lot of times in children with difficulties with either the idea, well, any part of praxis, they're going to have a lot of repetitive stimming behaviors because they're unable to or have difficulty creating new ideas and plans. So if a child has difficulty, you know, with any one of these aspects, they may, you know, line up, you know, their trains one by one, and it may look like a stimming behavior, but it's because they're playing like any child would, but are just having difficulty creating a new idea, or may love that idea, and it may be enjoyable for them. And then your children with postural disorder, that's basically being able to like contract your muscles at the same time to kind of maintain an upright posture. And your children with sensory discrimination disorder. So a discrimination disorder is going to not necessarily directly have too much stimming behaviors involved, but it just may be another issue that adds to a child's need to self-regulate. So we won't even really go into that too much. So
Kelly, somebody said they can't see the video, so can you back out of your presentation for a second?
yeah.
And then when you share the screen, check the box that says video and sound on the bottom. Do you see it when you share? So just when you hit share screen on Zoom.
Oh, out of my share screen. Stop share. Optimize for video clip.
Yep, exactly. Thank you.
You're welcome.
A stim is a self-stimulatory behaviour, so any action or movement that we do in order to explore one of our senses.
A repetitive action or movement or sound, it can be many different sorts of things, but it's generally doing something repetitively.
Some people flap their hands, some people rock, some people sway side to side, some people walk on their tiptoes.
I may shake my hands, or I may keep tapping my feet on the ground.
This is some solid perfume that I sniff whenever I feel like sniffing something because it's just very nice. This is a stim pen with glitter inside. This is a kind of squishy toy that fits my palm perfectly.
Stimming is important because it helps me regulate myself.
We need to stim in order to find a sense of balance and peace and relief. The kinds of stimming that are more automatic feel as normal to us as breathing. It's sad that some people think of it as weird or obsessive. They think of stimming as like repetitive, stereotypical behavior. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just a medium of expression.
It's very important to not discourage all stimming because it can take away somebody's coping mechanisms.
Okay. Now why don't we take questions? I know that there were quite a few questions, so I want to make sure that your specific issues are addressed. Let's see, escape.
There were, yep, a lot of questions. Thank you, Kelly. So let me go back. I'm going to start with so this question, my daughter has sensory over responsivity and compulsive behaviors that are repetitive. How do I determine when it's a stimming behavior? They look very similar.
So that is actually pretty complex. Your stimming behaviors tend to be, they're very repetitive. They often, like the definition said, they look like they're not functional, like that there's not a purpose. But we do know from individuals with autism and neurotypical that they do serve a purpose to help focus or regulate, right? But it's really hard to tell the difference because sometimes it's not necessarily a stimming behavior. It could be a repetitive play or and then just an enjoyable activity. As we know, like especially young children tend to repeat activities over and over as just a kind of a skill mastery. You know, and kind of practicing as they learn about their bodies. So really, it's hard. What it was a difference between stimming and what? What was the question?
And OCD, like compulsive
Oh,
behavior.
compulsive.
Yeah.
So more of a ritualistic behavior. The ritualistic behaviors tend to look a little bit more a little bit more control of the environment, or maybe touching a certain body part to, you know, certain objects, you know, so many times. And it may not necessarily be enjoyable to that child. It may just be that they have to do it, or they feel a sense of anxiety or dread if it's not completed. Is that answer?
Yeah, that one's a hard one. It's the function of the behavior, right? And you're just trying to guess what the function of the behavior is. Let's talk about when a stimming behavior harms a child, like head banging or self-hitting. What techniques or advice do you have to redirect the behavior or understand what the antecedent of the behavior would be? You guys are asking some hard questions. This is good.
Yeah. So, okay. So as an occupational therapist, it's important to understand the antecedent of a behavior, like to know what's happening and the function. It's important to understand both, right? However, oftentimes a behavior gets labeled as, you know, an escape behavior or an attention-seeking behavior. And the child is labeled as being like like the problematic behavior. So it's the behavior is often put back on the child themselves. Yet what we actually need to do is look at the child and figure out why, maybe why, like say, for example, the head banging is not just a stimming behavior, but considered an escape behavior. Why is the child trying to escape? Is the environment too overwhelming for them? If it's like, you know, a work activity, do they have proper ocular motor functioning to be able to engage in that? Do they have the communication and ability and accessibility to be able to tell you that they need a break? So we need to look at like the sensory environment. Is it too smelly? Is it too loud? Is it too bright? And not from the neurotypical perspective, but from the child's perspective. And we need to honor their requests, and teach them the skills that are kind of underlying this. So one thing we do a lot, especially if it's a self-injurious behavior, and that really for me, that was what worked, was teaching the child the tools to self-regulate before they got to the point where they couldn't control, banging their head. So, teaching them to pay attention to their bodies, to know when they're starting to get dysregulated, and teach them to ask for the things that may calm them, like a heavy work activity or a walk, or it may be a child that needs some vestibular input, and teaching them to use those tools before they get to the level where they feel that they need to use headbang as a self-regulation, or whatever self-injurious behavior it is, as a self-regulating strategy. For me, it was really just figuring out how my body was feeling, because I had a difficult time with, remember we talked about interoceptive behaviors, or the sense of interoception, which is your internal sense of being, right? So if you're having a hard time with recognizing that your heart's beating fast, you may not know that you're becoming overwhelmed or that you're mad, because you're not feeling your heart, beating to recognize it. So it was really kind of at that very basic sensorial level, learning to pay attention to my body and know, and learn the tools really for calming my body before it got to the point where self-injury occurred.
And wasn't there some research being done both locally and other places where they were using like Fitbits or those exercise watches to help individuals, like you said, because they couldn't identify internally, I'm starting to get anxious, and that they found that for some of the kids, that was a good
indicator.
Thank you. That, when it reached a certain number is when you needed to start doing your, sensory tool kit or whatever, because they weren't able to internalize it. They needed an external prompt, whether it was a teacher or a parent or a watch saying, this is the time to do it now.
Yeah, that there was one study, I believe it was in Indiana, that showed good results for that, especially for across the spectrum, but especially for your children who may have difficulty with expression. So and we actually use this for several kids in our program who were quite aggressive but unable to express their needs. So what we found is putting a Fitbit on them and monitoring their heart. For 2 weeks we monitored their heart, and that's an important aspect of it, because many children on the spectrum, because they're often in a fight or flight response, tend to have elevated heart rates even at a resting state. So we found like what their average resting heart rate, like when their child wasn't active and jumping and moving all the time. And then we were able to track their heart rate when they were just at play, but still kind of, regulated. And we made ranges for that. And then we were able to have the caregivers attach the Fitbit to their phones and kind of monitor the heart rate. So we would find like, oh, maybe, okay, every time the child's heart rate is like 110, they begin, pinching, or they begin biting, or something like that. And you can teach individuals to monitor their own heart rate. I actually got was it an iWatch? I don't know what that is. Is it an iWatch?
Apple Watch?
Apple Watch, yeah. An Apple Watch. But I just wasn't able to learn to tolerate actually wearing it. But just as a indicator, because you can actually set it to, vibrate or notify you once your heart becomes elevates beyond a certain level, I guess.
Can you talk a little bit, and I see a question about it, about the importance of using sensory proactively versus reactively? So I know when my son was younger, before school started, we would do things that would help regulate him, at least through lunchtime. So kind of being more proactive. Can you talk about?
Yeah. And that's actually the thing we recommend most. The occupational therapy team recommends a regular, scheduled, regimented, what we call like sensory-based activity or sensory diet, getting regular heavy work in, regular movement in order to keep the individual at a just right level of arousal. And this is true for all people. This is why exercise is found to be so helpful, and not just lowering depression rates or maintaining health, but even for maintaining mood. Exercises, which is basically sensory, very vital in keeping our brains at that optimal level of arousal. If we're under aroused, it wakes us up, and if we're over aroused, it calms us down. So really keeping a scheduled routine sensory exercise routine throughout the day is the most effective part, or most effective tool in maintaining like a just right level of arousal. Like for me, for example, I used to get very dysregulated when I was a kid and just like laugh hysterically. And for me, when I was laughing, it was not a sign of like happiness or pleasure. It was a sign that my brain was overloaded. I was overwhelmed. My fight or flight response was kicked in. And the bad part was I'd be laughing hysterically, and that would often draw attention from other people. And so then as they started laughing and pointing and like trying to get me to laugh even more, because it was like a belly laugh, like it seems fun, right? So they would try to get, people would try to engage with me, try to, laugh with me, but that just added more stimulation to me. And unfortunately, it would often end in like, aggressive behavior, because my brain was just so overwhelmed that I couldn't function. And back to the proactive versus reactive strategy, that would be reactive would be like as the behavior was occurring or as the dysregulation is occurring, you take the individual out of the situation. You maybe provide some sensory or calming in the moment, but that's not the most effective tool to maintaining regulation, because that's already after this dysregulation has occurred. It'd be like saying, oh yeah, if your kitchen catches on fire, you can use this fire extinguisher. Well, the fire extinguisher is helpful in the moment, but you want to try to keep your kitchen from catching on fire. It's, you want to try to keep, your cool, keep at a just right level of arousal, in order to avoid some of those, traumatizing meltdowns, because, they are hard on us. It's embarrassing, overwhelming, and exhausting to get to that point where you're melting down.
So another hard question, and kind of in that, when we're talking about like the function of the behavior. So one of the questions is, when my son was 1, he started looking sideways. And when he turned 3, he started to poke his eyes as part of it. And parents concerned, of course, that it is, going to injure his eye.
Yeah. So that's definitely, you're really going to want to talk to an occupational therapist with training in sensory integration, because besides behavioral techniques such as telling the child no and reinforcing when they do that, the occupational therapist, as long as they're trained in sensory, can look at that and say, oh, maybe the child wants proprioceptive input by poking their eye, and stretching their ligaments. Or, they might be looking out of the side of their eye and your ocular motor system is very intertwined with your vestibular system, your sense of balance. So, your occupational therapist may say, okay, increase their time on the swing as a calming strategy in order to meet that vestibular need. So it doesn't always look like, just like, looking side-eyed, it is a visual stim, but oftentimes, including vestibular input and proprioceptive input is going to be the way to address it. And you'll see once that need is met, the eye poking naturally just stops.
And we have another question kind of along those lines is, my son has very limited speech, but he uses his voice system. He starts to chirp when he's overstimulated, and then that high-pitched squeal or screaming with pacing. Is there a way to teach him to stem vocally with a lower or quieter sound? Sometimes it's hard to take him to movie theaters or settings like the library.
I mean, you can try teaching him, but he's still gonna need to get that need met. And it may be, it could be so many things. It could be that he's maybe very sensitive to the sound of the movie theater, very, high arousal and needing to chirp to kind of drown out the sound, kind of compete with the sound and make it predictable. Or it could be that he's, needing sensory input. So again, like, talking with your occupational therapist really is going to be because they need to look at their entire sensory profile to figure out what exactly the need is with that specific stim. So because it could be many different possible ways.
Different things,
Yeah.
absolutely. So there's going to be, I don't know if you can answer this. There's a question about using the SIPT, the SIP test, because it's not normed for specifically children with autism. And the parent was wondering if that's a valid test for a child with autism. Is that something you feel comfortable answering?
I do not feel comfortable answering that because I know that there's a new one or a newer, I'm not sure if it was released or not, coming out. But I don't know anything about the newer one.
Okay, if we have any OTs
So
maybe on, they can answer if they feel. So another question, can you be over responsive with one sense and under responsive in another?
Oh, absolutely. For example, like I talked about, that I can, hear the electricity going through the wires and people's heart beating and, the clock's ticking and the refrigerator running. So that's over responsivity. But my proprioceptive system, my sense of muscles and joints is very undersensitive. And so, I crave a lot of input with that. I'm constantly like touching, squeezing, pressing, bumping into things to kind of gain more input because it's my volume is a little bit too low on that one. So I don't feel my body, quite as well as I should. I'm very clumsy because of it.
I'm clumsy too. So this one, I'm going to make a plug. I see a lot of questions, and Kelly, can you talk about the difference between occupational therapy done at school versus occupational therapy done in a medical setting? And that we hear often, especially from younger parents, that they'll say, oh, well, my son's getting or my daughter's getting OT at school, and thinking that's going to solve the sensory issues or help with the sensory issues. Can you talk a little bit about the difference?
Yeah. So, so if we're talking specifically about sensory issues, occupational therapy in the schools is considered a secondary service, meaning when we see a child, our goal is not, we may see that a child has lots of deficits that they may need, an intensive sensory integration regimen. In the clinic, we may want to see them frequently, but in the school setting, if the sensory is not impeding their learning, that is not, our goal is not to fix the deficit. Our goal is to help the child enough that they can function into the child in the classroom. So we want to set up the environment, provide some strategies for the teacher, enough for the child to be able to participate, but we're not going to do an incomplete, we don't even have time or ability. We don't even have the clinic and all the tools in the school setting to do a complete like sensory integration session with them. So the goal of school OT is very different from clinic OT, because the clinic may be trying to help the child maybe create new neural pathways, or teaching the family kind of long-term strategies for regulation, versus the school's goal is to support the teacher and the staff so that the child can learn better.
That was good. And, one of the benefits we fought for with the autism insurance mandate is that occupational therapy, speech therapy, and ABA services are covered through all autism insurance mandated in or governed in California. So if you have a question, go ask for an assessment through a medical insurance for occupational therapy. There's things that they can do and things that they can't, but it is a covered benefit in most cases.
Yes, it is. And very different functional skills are addressed in each setting. So
one of the questions was teaching danger. And is that something an occupational therapist would do, or would you see it more as a behavioral through a home program?
It would depend on the child, really. If it was more of a sensory deficit, well, I mean, in theory, the occupational therapist would address it. I don't know many who do that in our area. But what would be the danger that they're specifically looking at?
Yeah, and that's the question. So we say danger, but and this is one of the issues we get when our teens and our adults, like danger could be not touching a hot stove or running in front of a car or online behavior. Like danger is,
there are so many things that could be
100 different skills. Yeah. And so when you start to think about it, you've got to be really specific, because you'll miss some skills. Oh, my son hugs me hard. He's a big boy and sometimes it hurts me. Is his hugging stemming?
He hugs you very hard.
Uh-huh.
So it may not be stimming. It could be stimming, but it may just be him trying to gain kind of body awareness and proprioceptive input. Because children either they may have like difficulty with like under arousal, which they probably wouldn't seek the intense hugging unless they had the cognitive skills to create their own tools. Or it could be a sensory craving kid who really just needs a ton of proprioceptive input to be able to feel their body and calm themselves. I mean, we all like deep pressure. That's why massages are so popular.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And here's another one that I would consider more sensory. My son presses his chin and sometimes his chest against my husband and me. It's not repetitive, but it's regular, at least once a day, and it's random. Would this be considered stimming?
Yes, this is another proprioceptive stimming activity. And you'll see a lot of times individuals will either press on their mouths or their chin, because we have many like nerve endings right in this general area for our mouth. So individuals will often like hit or press or push their mouth or chin in order to gain the most input in a short amount and small space of time, because there are so many nerves right there.
I'm looking at Marvin. He's asking about ABA therapy and been waiting. So Marvin, you're also able, depending on how long you're waiting, at any time you can go to your health insurance company and tell them that you've been on a waiting list for too long and you want another provider. So there would be another provider. I know everybody's short right now. They've lost a lot of providers or employees, but you can still always request another provider. You don't have to wait for the one that they've assigned to you. Somebody asked, what did you call my son's hugging behavior?
The hugging.
What did you call that hugging behavior?
Oh, I mean, it could be stimming in some kids, and it could just be meeting their proprioceptive needs in others. It's hard to tell just by the description.
I know it's
Because
7.
not everything that is a sensory, getting a sensory need met is necessarily stimming.
Right. Right. And we all stem. Remember that, right? We all
stem.
I know it's 7:30. It's the end of our time, but we still have questions. My son needs therapy, but no providers. Yeah. Parents, we've been giving the providers a lot of grace, as we should, these last couple of years. But again, you still have rights, and it's okay to be assertive, not aggressive, but assertive, and tell them, you've been waiting too long and you want a provider that has an opening now. So whether that's for any medical professional, speech, OT, ABA, a therapist, they're required. There's something in California called the timely access law that says actually they have 10 days to hook you up with a provider. So, again, there's a fine line between grace, but also making sure that your family's getting what they need. And you can always file complaints with your health insurance if it's taking too long. All right, Ms. Kelly, thank you. As always, we could probably spend another hour answering questions, and this was really informative. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I hope all of you learned at least one thing. I know I did, so I always love coming to these, and especially from Kelly's perspective, hearing what's happening the latest in occupational therapy, and just as she shares her experience. So thank you, and thank you so much to our interpreter for interpreting tonight. We appreciate her, and we appreciate all of you. So we will be sending this out tomorrow, and we hope we see you at our next presentation. Take care, everybody. Stay safe. Bye.